Before I introduce our keynote speaker this year, I want to just mention how we actually choose a keynote speaker, because we don't do this lightly. We, first of all, consult with our partners and we ask if they have any suggestions. And then we do such an outrageous thing as find out if we can find them on TED Talks. And then we check them out on TED Talks. And the whole issue is whether or not we feel they're appropriate to the STEM Summit and they're inspirational. And in fact, we feel like we've brought that to you today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Warner. The theme in Dr. John Warner's bio is in fact green chemistry, and you're going to hear it throughout. He is the recipient of the 214 Perkins Medal, widely acknowledged as the highest honor in American industrial chemistry. He received his BS in chemistry from UMass Boston, thank you very much, and his PhD in chemistry from Princeton University. After working at Polaroid for nearly a decade, John then served as a fully tenured professor at UMass Boston and also taught UMass Lowell in the fields of chemistry and plastics engineering. John is one of the founders and leaders in the field of green chemistry, and in fact, co-author of the seminal defining textbook in green chemistry. In 2007, he founded Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry, where he serves as president and chief technology officer. He's also co-founder of Beyond Benign, a nonprofit dedicated to educating people about green chemistry and sustainability. And in fact, they have a booth in our exhibit hall, John has over 250 patents, published papers, and books. All of them many of them most recently dealing with the applications of green chemistry in ways that make him totally relevant today. John has received many other awards, but I do want to mention that he was elected as a fellow of the American Chemical Society and named one of the 25 visionaries changing the world by Utne Reader. So it's my honor and my privilege to introduce to you John Warner as our speaker.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be up here. Sitting in that chair there, these lights are really intense, so I want to invite the other panelists. If you want to sit downstairs, I won't be offended, because these lights do start to hurt. It's a pleasure to be here. I live in Wilmington, Mass, and I think I left some of my voice in Wilmington, so I'll do the best that I can to project. Funny, because I've had this upper respiratory thing, I've been home, and I decided to clean things, and I'm cleaning out boxes, and I found a roll of film. This is an old 35 millimeter roll. I can't even remember owning a camera so long ago, but I'm holding this roll of film, and I'm trying to find out now how you go and develop such a thing. CVS does it. But I'm looking at that film, and I have no idea what's on that film. Somewhere there's a latent image of 24 or 36 exposures, and someday I'm going to develop it, and I'm going to look at these things and say, wow. And I see that as an interesting metaphor for education. That educators are interacting through K through 12 and university, and you leave a latent image on the students. And you have no idea, years later, how that latent image might develop and might turn into some inspiration or some incredibly important moment in that person's life. And unfortunately, you don't get to even know that it ever happens for the most part. And so I can't think of a more important profession for society today than STEM educators. And so being invited to come and speak to you all I can't think of a greater honor, and I'm just really happy to be here to share today with you and what you're all doing. My slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this thing called green chemistry. And again, the talk isn't really so much about green chemistry, but more about how we approach certain issues in society. We today are in such a polarized society. You open up the newspaper, you turn on the radio, you look on the internet, you hear about all kinds of amazing, scary things. You hear about this molecule that's toxic, this molecule that's dangerous, this product is killing us, this is bad, this is scary, this is bad, this is bad, this is really bad, this is bad, this is scary. Oh my God, who in their right mind would want to be a chemist in 2017? We got all these problems. It's almost like that game Whack-A-Mole. You know the game Whack-A-Mole where the little guy comes up and you hit it on the head and another one whacks it? Well, what is the mascot of the American Chemical Society? It's a mole. All right? We hear about, brominated flame retardants, whack. We hear about phthalates, whack. We hear about bisphenol A, whack. And we're like out of breath because we're trying to figure out, is this really a serious thing? Is it a lot of hype? What's going on here? We're trying to wrap our hands, but before we know that one, this one comes, and we're out of breath, and we're wondering, man, is this... But it's not a game. This is serious stuff. But what we can't do is we can't despair. Despair sells. Okay, can you imagine if Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King got up and said, I have a nightmare? All right, people would have written checks, okay? People write checks out of despair, but they don't get out of their seats and do stuff. And if we're really going to address this, we have to focus on that positive future that is offered through STEM education. So I wonder then, are we really asking the right questions? Instead of asking, is this molecule toxic? Is this thing dangerous? Is this scary? Isn't a more fundamental question, why would a chemist make a hazardous material in the first place? Isn't that more fundamental? Why would this happen? And so maybe instead of looking at how we make molecules and products, we should be looking at how do we make chemists. Now, I'm not a historian, a sociologist. I can't really quote stuff about history, but I'm a chemist. So maybe there's something in this story that might be relevant, okay? So I'm not some kid that grew up in the second grade with chemistry sets dreaming of being a chemist. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you recognize my accent, you can tell I'm from Quincy, Massachusetts, a little bit south of Boston. I have a very distinct accent. Quincy, the home of two presidents, John Adams and John Quincy Adams. But also, I believe, my most favorite important organic chemist that ever lived, Robert Burns Woodward, is from the city of Quincy, got the Nobel Prize. He would have actually gotten 3 Nobel Prizes at least if they awarded them posthumously. They're an amazing chemist, but I didn't know anything about that guy growing up, okay? I got this huge Sicilian family. I had 45 first cousins with a 1-mile radius growing up. And we were carpenters, plumbers, electricians, things like that. We had a very healthy fear. I don't know if fear is the right word, but we didn't really understand this thing called college and things like that. And so, when I was graduating, and my friends were talking about going to college, I'm kind of curious. I wonder what that was. And I thought, this is Quincy High School. When I had English in the 11th grade on the 2nd floor, I thought that was higher education. I don't know. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go to school. So I went to UMass Boston. Okay, I got to tell you, had UMass Boston not existed, I would not have gone to college. It's an amazing opportunity for me. My family didn't really understand it. I came home, I said, I'm going to go to school, Mom and Dad, and my father was mad, my mother was crying. And I agreed that I'd work full-time in the construction industry and work 40 hours and pay my own tuition. But what horrified my family was not the fact that I was going to college so much as what I went to school for. You see, I was a music major. I went to school and I played in a band called, wait for it, The Elements. Okay? Now, this had nothing to do with carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, nothing about that, okay? The Rubik's Cube, a glass ball, hey, it's the late 70s, all right? These were our elements. And things went pretty well for, a high school garage band. We started playing 3 times a week at the Best Worst Dives in Boston. We were playing on the Booze Cruise. We had an agent. We had a recording contract. We were actually recording in the same studio as Jay Giles, and things seemed to be happening. when disaster hit and the drummer, my close friend, ended up getting leukemia, and over the course of 6 months, he passed away. So UMass, like most universities, have a core requirement. A music major still has to take a math class, still has to take a foreign language. I had to take a science class. Oh, man, a science class. Well, I kind of liked biology, mitosis, meiosis, genetics. That seemed really cool. And I kind of liked physics, astronomy, subatomic particles. So I'm going, should I take biology? Should I take physics? Should I take biology? Should I take physics? And I couldn't decide. In a moment of indecision, I added them up, divided by 2, and I said, I'll take chemistry. Not because I had any interest in it, but because I couldn't decide between biology and physics, and it seemed like the mathematical average. All right, and so I'm taking chemistry in this classroom, and I'm sitting there in the lab, and a professor comes walking into the lab, Professor Jean-Pierre Ancel. He looks at me, music major, walks by, and he looks at the kid next to me and says, would you like to do research? I overheard the conversation. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and I said, can I come? And I followed him into the lab, and I got to tell you, everything changed. All my life, because I was marginally good at music, I was an artist. And in life, there are 2 types of people. There's artists and the sciences. I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist. And so it never even occurred to me. But when I went into the lab and I saw that chemists made things, they created things. I had this image of ramming my brain full of electrodes and composing a piece of music on a keyboard and seeing some machine go blip, 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 and then designing a molecule. And I said, I betcha the same blips happen, that making something that has never existed in the world, creating things, creativity has nothing to do with the word art, has nothing to do with the word science. Those are human constructs. That creating something that didn't exist isn't really part of those words. And once I could see that aspect, I really fell in love with chemistry. And next thing you know, I got 5 papers in peer-reviewed journals. At 19 years old, I spoke at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington. In fact, I made the cover of Celebrity magazine with Boy George. Not as a musician. Okay, so one day the phone rings, and this guy with an awesome voice goes, John Warner, we consider you Boston's best and brightest college graduate. We want to do a story on you. I said, no. I hung up the phone. A couple minutes later, they called, no, really? Really? And I hung up the phone. The next day I go to school. I'm working construction, so I wasn't as snappy dressed back then as I am now. And so I'm unshaven, I'm working in my lab, and the chancellor of the university comes to the lab and bangs on the door and goes, you will go get your picture taken. So they grab me kicking and screaming, and here I am surrounded by all these happy people, I'm hating life, and they do this story about this kid who has synthesized over 100 molecules that have never existed in the world before, assembling atoms in unique geometries that God never intended. And I'm reading this thing and I think, I'm a chemist. How did that happen? Well, flotsam and jetsam, the next thing I find myself at Princeton doing cancer chemotherapy. Okay? And I was blessed to work with an amazing group of people, cranked out a bunch of papers, and was part of a large team that came up with this molecule that is now sold by the Eli Lilly company called Alimta. It's one of the most successful solid tumor anti-cancer drugs. And if you've been to the Princeton campus, 3 years ago, they opened up a 7-story chemistry building built entirely on the proceeds of this one molecule. So Princeton's pretty happy about this thing. I actually signed the patent disclosure, and so it's kind of fun to see that part of it. But just to show the way society and science, I lost my mom to cancer, a few years ago, and she was actually receiving the drug that I had helped develop 15 years earlier. So this relationship between science and society has always been kind of interesting. So this is my lab at Princeton. My dad came to commencement. I never told him I was a graduate student. I said I was an apprentice, okay? He would have killed me if I told him I was going to go to school for another 4 years. And so he's kind of looking at a telephone here. Not quite that model, but one day I'm working in the lab and the phone rings, and it's a senior corporate officer from the Polaroid Corporation, a guy named Lloyd Taylor. All right? Now, at this time, Polaroid, Bell Labs had kind of gone out of favor, and Polaroid had emerged as the coolest place as an organic chemist to be. And so it's Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, this cool thing. But this guy was kind of creeping me out. Okay? He says, John, I remember when you were on Celebrity Magazine. I remember you at the National Academy. I'm thinking this guy's a stalker, okay? And so he goes, let's have lunch. Okay. I told 6 people where I was going, when I'd be back. And I go and have lunch with him. And at lunch, he offers me the job to head exploratory research at Polaroid. I say, dude, I'm like 25 years old. I already have 2 academic appointments as a medicinal chemist. He tells me how much he's going to pay me. I say, when do I start? And next thing you know, I find myself at Polaroid. And I was blessed to have a whole bunch of things that I can do. Polaroid, Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, received the Perkin Medal. Oh my God, that's got to be amazing. Then they gave it to me, so how amazing can it be? But I was blessed to have a bunch of people working with me, and I had patents in holography, patents in medical diagnostics, patents in all kinds of different things. Well, what would a medicinal chemist do at a place like Polaroid? Well, one of the things I did is I thought of the way the biological systems work, how molecules are manufactured in physiological systems. And I realized that there's a whole set of underpinning principles of how things work in biological systems at the molecular level that we humans in manufacturing have never been able to accomplish. And so, it's kind of interesting. If you think about all the amazing things that we humans make, all right, the electronics, the pharmaceuticals, all these things. But the manufacturing processes are at high temperature, high pressure, using these harsh reagents. And yet nature outperforms humans hands down in molecular diversity and structure, and yet does it all at room temperature, does it all at ambient pressure, using water as a solvent. And so I looked at that, and I came up with a set of principles, and I'm not going to kill you on this today, about entropy and enthalpy, and I came up with this concept called non-covalent derivatization, all right? And again, like I said, if you wanted me to, I could talk for 30 or 40 hours on this thing. Best cure for insomnia you can imagine. I'm so much into this, the license plate of my car is NCD, okay? So I really get into this. But one of the things I did, I came up with a way using this new technology that I came up with to control the dissolution kinetics of small molecules in a multi-layer film system. And in fact, the photographic industry called them Warner complexes. Now, that's kind of funny in a way. So a few years ago, I was in Japan, and I was giving a talk on green chemistry, and people from Fuji, the photographic company, asked me if I would come and visit them. Now, I thought they wanted to talk about green chemistry, so I show up and they go, oh no, we want to talk about Warner complexes. I go, seriously? And they brought me into the research lab, and this research in the lab, they had all these bottles and jars, Warner complex X-23B, Warner complex 3-27, and the guy was so proud, he says to all of us, this is the John Warner of the look of disappointment on these people's faces. It's okay, it still haunts me. But anyways, we have this new technology, and Polaroid wants to go to large-scale manufacturing. Well, in the United States, we have this thing called TSCA. You don't just do it. You have to go and you have to get what's called a low-volume exemption, a pre-manufacturing notification. Now, this is like 1989, 1990. So we're filling bankers' boxes and sending them to Washington. And we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And the EPA ultimately rejects the application, not because of toxicity, not because of environmental impacts. They just, small particles, are you crazy? Molecular complexes, are you high? They had no idea what I was talking about. And so Polaroid sent me on an airplane to Washington, D.C. to talk about Warner complexes, okay? So this might have been the first time in my life I'd been on an airplane, first or second time. I'm holding a briefcase full of overhead transparencies. I'm a little scared, a little mad, but I'm gonna go talk to them, okay? And I meet the branch chief of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, this guy named Paul Anastas. Wait a minute. Remember when I was at UMass Boston and I was a music major and I followed the kid into the research lab? It was him. I've known him since I was 15 years old. We went to UMass Boston. In fact, we were playing in a jazz band at the time with his older brother. So Paul's older brother, Nick, me, my older brother, Matthew, with awesome hair. So I knew Paul and his family, and I could, so actually the guitar player, if you've been to Las Vegas, Legends of Rock in Las Vegas, the dude who plays Rod Stewart is actually John Cantelli, the guy that was my guitar player. Has nothing to do with this talk. It's kind of cool, though. And so anyways, I could give Paul a dope slap upside the head and say, Paul, what we've been doing for years is manufacturing this process with all these solvents, all these reagents, all this nasty, and here we have this new technology that is less toxic, more environmentally benign, and the EPA is giving us a hard time because it's different. Isn't anything better for the environment going to be different? And if the EPA has rules to make it difficult to do things different, isn't that a problem? Now let's hold that thought for a second, because I gotta go back. I'm at Polaroid. Things are going really well. My career is just, I'm having a blast. I love Polaroid dearly. I love everything that's happening. When disaster hits yet again, and I lose my 2-year-old son, John, to a birth defect, called biliary atresia. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, he would have been 26 years old. He was born with his liver completely detached from his intestines. He couldn't metabolize water and soluble nutrients, so he got surgery at the end, the beginning, and 2 years later, we lost him. No one knows the cause of biliary atresia. So lying in bed at night, the night of his funeral, I'm staring at the ceiling and I'm asking myself, I wonder if something I touched caused my son's birth defect. I wonder if, heaven forbid, something I got an award for caused his disease. I didn't know the answer to this question. Here I am, I'm familiar with these books. I am a pretty successful chemist. I'd already synthesized over 2,500 molecules, top of my career, probably the most prolific synthetic organic chemist my age on the planet. And I realized I never had a class in toxicology. I never had a class in environmental mechanisms. How is it possible that I can be so successful and have no idea what makes a molecule toxic? So I start looking, and I find, okay, people know stuff about this, elevated breast cancer mortality among professional chemists, all kinds of different things, report after report. How is it possible that I had 4 years of undergraduate, 3.5 years of graduate school, I never had a conversation, I never had a discussion, I never had a class, I never heard a seminar about what makes molecules hazardous? Sure, I learned how to label waste and what gloves to wear and the stuff, to protect the organizations I was in. But the intellectual fundamentals of what makes a molecule toxic, Every year in the United States, we graduate 15,000 undergraduates and chemists, 3,000 masters, 3,000 PhDs. For the first time in history, in 2004, more women became chemists than men. What could be more important to the field of chemistry than an understanding of structure-activity relationships correlated with impacts on human health, the environment, reproductive health, and all those things? But here's the thing. Not one university requires a chemist to take a class in toxicology or environmental mechanisms. So when you hear about a red dye that causes cancer, when you hear about a plasticizer that causes birth defects, when you hear about these things and you say to yourself, how does this happen? Do you think this might have something to do with it? This isn't an epic battle of good and evil. This isn't industry going, blah, we're making profits out of toxic materials. There is a missing element in the field of chemistry. And so we needed to create a science. We needed journals, we needed textbooks, we needed classes, we needed all these different things that define a chemistry, a field of science. And that is the birth of green chemistry, that a guy at Polaroid and a guy at the EPA wrote this book. Had I thought anyone was ever going to read this book, we would have written a better book. But it's like, next thing you know, it gets translated in over 15 different languages. I feel like Forrest Gump. It's like anyone could have written this book. You turn the pages, you're waiting for something inspiring, and it's just, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, chemists should know this. Yeah, chemists should know this. But oh my God, for the last several years, I've been over 45 countries. I'm meeting politicians, I'm meeting presidents, I'm meeting ministers, I'm meeting princes, I'm meeting this guy. And it's just such a simple, straightforward thing. But the point here is that in the book, what we tried to articulate is what we call the 12 principles of green chemistry that say, when someone starts to invent something, that's the best time to be anticipating the impacts on human health and the environment, not after. What happens more often in industry, and my industrial friends here can attest to this, that a scientist invents something in an industry, and everyone gets excited. And 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, they're all getting excited. And then all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, we can't manufacture this. That solvent is regulated. Wait a minute, we can't manufacture this, that thing. And then we have to hope to fix that problem, and many times we can't. Or we have to reinvent it a second time. So if the workforce has these skills at the outset, faster to market, time to market, it just makes so much sense. Because what green chemistry is the act of removing hazard from society. Yes, it has some benefit to human health and the environment, but that's not enough. It's got to have superior performance and compete in the marketplace and superior cost. Because if we're dependent on regulations to force society to use products that don't really work, that are too expensive, that's a failure of chemistry. We should get back in the lab and do a better job. Because just hypothetically, if an election changes the cultural path of environmental regulations in a country, hypothetically, those regulations no longer are going to stand. But if the science and the technology is sound to begin with, we're not dependent on that. But that's the point. Thank you. And so, in my opinion, if I have a technology that works better, costs better, and oh, by the way, is better for the environment, the only barrier is its invention. We have to ask ourselves, in STEM education, what could be more important than training the future generation, the future workforce, to get this right? Okay, so here I am doing really, really well at Polaroid, and I left. I quit. And I went to the UMass system. I was a full professor and chair of chemistry in Boston, plastics engineering in Lowell, director of biochemistry, and we started the world's first PhD program in green chemistry. Everything that's in a normal chemistry program, but we added a one-semester class in mechanistic toxicology. We added a one-semester class in environmental mechanisms. And you know what? Over the next 11 years, over 120 students at various levels went through this program. You know what the average time it took one of these students to get a job in industry? On average, 2 days. The longest any student from this program spent looking for a job? 6 days, because she turned down the first 6 job offers. I'm still getting phone calls from companies, John, you gotta, because they're world-class inventors and scientists that actually understand a little bit of the landscape of regulations and toxicology. You know, because the way I look at it, if you look at all the materials available to society today, the ceiling tiles, the carpeting, the electronics, all the things we interact with, maybe 10% escape scrutiny. 90% have something that needs to be fixed. Maybe it's a big thing, maybe it's a little thing, but we need about 90% in it. Now, if you do a Google search and look in the supply chain and do what's called an alternatives assessment, you might find something better 20-25% of the time. But I submit to you right now that in 2017, over 65% of the technologies haven't been invented yet. Now, we could look at this and be scared, or we could say, what better time in human history to be in STEM? The world desperately needs people to invent technologies. Can you imagine a high school student interning at a company or an undergraduate student working in the lab, pouring beakers and flasks, converting a traditional technology into an environmentally sound technology? Hundreds of thousands of people they will never meet are going to avoid being exposed to nasty things. Why isn't this a clarion call for the sciences? Why is it that if I go to a party and I'm hanging around with a group of people and they say, John, what do you do? And I say, I'm a chemist. Talk about a conversation stopper. You can almost hear the record scratch. Everyone starts looking at their feet, But think of the impact that that has on all of our decisions going forward. If people have this reaction to the field of chemistry, who's going to invent the future technologies? How do we get to a sustainable society if we're not inventing these technologies? All right? So, right now, when a chemist comes to a high school or a middle school, what do? They light things on fire. Hey, kids, be a chemist. And they light things on fire. That worked in the 60s. But today's the kids' Game Boys, they're a lot more interesting than these little fire things that we gotta, Instead, can you imagine going with a quiet voice and saying, the world has problems and we need solutions to be invented? All of a sudden, those students in that class start to think, maybe that's why I should do what I'm doing. And that's the opportunity, and that's why I come and talk with you all here, because no one could be in a more important job than in STEM education to let the next generation understand the important things that we need to do. This isn't the birth of ethics. This isn't as if people were immoral and didn't think. The thing is that before we kind of accepted that chemistry has to be toxic. Chemistry has to be dangerous. It's just the way it is. But it's okay. We're going to wear gloves to protect our hands, and we're going to wear masks to protect our lungs, and goggles to protect our eyes, and put scrubbers and filters and smokestacks to protect the air. And say, it's okay. We're going to keep it covered because we're going to protect people from exposure. Well, the problem is that history has shown all of those headlines that I talked about earlier is one of these exposures didn't work. And so if green chemistry is a revolution, it's saying, instead of focusing on exposure, we now have the skill set in the last 10 years to look at a molecule and ask ourselves, how can we make it not be a carcinogen? How can we make it not be an endocrine disruptor? And start learning. Now, there's no magic green button. We're not going to snap our fingers and tomorrow this all be done. It's going to take decades and decades to figure it out. Modern chemistry has been around for over 200 years. But we got to start somewhere. Because, man, when you've got a tanker truck in the middle of a city and it tips over and bad things happen, I'd rather get a broom than a body bag. And that if we can get this done, there is a future when this starts to happen. Industry gets this immediately. I mean, really, the next year is the 20th anniversary of the book. Dow, 3M, Pfizer, L'Oreal, all the big companies immediately got it. Because if you got a nasty material and you got a safe material, the economics just pencil out to store it, to treat it, all the different things. It's much more cost effective to have, the safer material. But I think that last one, new employment and recruitment, is the most important. One of my students got an award from the EPA. She's working on low temperature semiconductors, and she goes down to Washington and she gives this wonderful talk. There's about 350 people in the audience. They all applaud. Then this one dude gets up, angry kind of guy, and he goes, "Excuse me, ma'am, but aren't you worried that having a career associated with green chemistry will limit your job opportunities?" She had like 6 or 7 job offers at the moment, but she looks at the guy and she goes, "Dude, why would I want to work for a company that didn't want me doing green chemistry?" He kind of shakes his head, "Oh, you silly person." At which point about 160 graduate students stood up and gave a standing ovation. Talk about a moment. The next generation gets this. The next generation, this isn't a question. They're just thirsty to have the knowledge to do it in an effective way. But what I did, I went back to Abraham Lincoln's time and I tallied all the environmental regulations imposed by the U.S. federal government over the last 180 or so years. 1962, Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring, year I was born. And all of a sudden you see the birth of the modern environmental movement. All these dots are pieces of legislation saying if you're working with this, that, or the other thing, you'd make sure it's not getting into the land, the air, and the sea. Now, I'm a simple chemist. I'm not a mathematician or a statistician, but if I look at this long enough, I start to see a trend. All right? Industry sees environmental regulations as one of the single biggest impediments to success in the commercial marketplace. DuPont 3 years ago had an R&D budget of $1 billion a year. DuPont 3 years ago environmental compliance budget was $1 billion a year. They spent the same amount of money inventing their future as they did to make sure and document that they were compliant with these regulations. So the CEO of DuPont says, from now on, I want all my scientists to only invent non-toxic, environmentally benign, safe technology. Well, gee whiz, that makes sense. But not one of those scientists have had a class in toxicology. Not one of those scientists have had a class. So the desire is there. The ability isn't, and that is the opportunity that faces our future, to deliver that ability through STEM education. Now, my father was an electrician. Our house was filled with toolboxes. I think our silverware was in a toolbox in our kitchen. So I'm forced to think, and the chemical enterprises has all these drawers. We can make carbon-carbon bond formings, oxidations, reductions, all the different things. If we can design a molecule that doesn't violate some fundamental rule, we can probably make it. But if we imagine a green chemistry toolbox, where each one of those drawers has environmentally compliant, responsible things, I gotta tell you, it's about 90% empty. The students that you talk to tomorrow, the students that you talk to next week, the students you talk to next year are the people that are gonna fill this green chemistry toolbox. Your inspiration, your role to catalyze the future couldn't be understated, okay? It couldn't be overstated. So here I am, I'm called the country's #1 science professor. I spend a half an hour in the Oval Office with President Bush. Here's another 11 years. And I end up leaving academia. I loved academia. I think academia is the most precious, important job that we have. But I felt it was time to look at collaborations with industry. So in history's worst economy, a full tenured professor in the state of Massachusetts gives it all up to start a for-profit company in Wilmington, Massachusetts. I gotta have my head examined, right? But I felt if I played by the rules of industry and could show this is the way to get it, then what could be a better proof? Okay, and so this is a dream come true. 42,000 square foot facility with every piece of research equipment you could possibly imagine to synthesize molecules and polymers, to extrude plastics, to fabricate devices. Got about 25 brilliant scientists, and all we do is we invent. Okay, and so, you know, I'm not going to talk about all the things. You're welcome to go look at warnerbabcock.com. We got construction materials. We started a company that is selling asphalt and wood composites called Collaborative Aggregates. We started a pharmaceutical company. We have an ALS drug and a cancer drug in clinical trials. We have hair color technology, hair curling technology, and about 40 other things that just over the last 11 years, we've been about 150 patents, and we've just been working with other companies or spinning out companies just to show the world that there's a different way to do things. All right? But what's most important to me is not the invention, although I love doing that, but it's beyond benign, the nonprofit. All right? Because that's where we really need to be. You know, go back. We tend to tell people, oh, you're an artist, you're a scientist, and we pigeonhole people so early. We need to start really thinking about this process and really asking ourselves some important questions. So I now go to art museums and talk about creativity. I'll bring a piano up on the keyboard, up on the desk, and I'll say, I'll play a diminished seventh chord. And people go, ooh, that sounds tough. I'll play a major seventh chord. They go, oh, that sounds good. And I say, you know, if I just played the major seventh chord, you'd be bored. It's kind of like elevator music. But because I played the diminished seventh first, it creates this tension. And then if you listen to good music, the reason we like good music is because that tension and release. Tension and release. And you know what the funny thing is? In chemistry, when we design molecules, we have this thing where every chemical reaction goes through high energy tension and release. Who would have ever thought that a musician and a chemist could sit down and share notes and talk about. When we talk about collaborating, we celebrate a chemist and a biologist working together. That's not the 21st century. We got to look at music and that, and athletic, so here at University of Virginia, this music professor and I, we go off now and we do these gigs where I give a talk like this, then he comes up and we banter about improvisation and jazz, and then a 17-piece swing band gets up and plays his composed music, the 12 principles of green chemistry. That's where it's at. And so another example, my father-in-law is a soccer coach. And he asked me, John, what do you chemists do? And I explained about chemical reactions and how we design chemical reactions. We put protecting groups over here, and then we have reactions go over there. And I go, it's kind of like this. And I explained how when he designs a soccer play and I design a synthesis, humans have a small, finite patterns of thought, and we need to learn to superimpose them and stop putting ourselves in buckets. That's where true creativity comes from. So Beyond Benign is on the front line of doing these kinds of things, and I really encourage you to go to the exhibit next hall and look at it. There's K through 12, there's elementary school, middle school, high school curriculum. But the thing that I want to just end on is what I'm most proud of is the green chemistry commitment. We need to look at the way we teach chemistry in the future, all right? And so what we're doing is we're asking chemistry department chairs to sign a commitment saying, we know we don't have the faculty to teach it, we know we don't have the curriculum, but somehow there's got to be a day in the future where no student graduates from a university with chemistry that hasn't understood something about toxicity and environmental impact. And the great news is we got almost 50 signers of this commitment already. Now, this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the students, your students, the students in STEM that are looking for meaningful reasons to do the things that they want to do. And so, I got to be really honest. I'm hoping that we can grow this. If you are from you're an alumni of a university, look up, find out if they've signed the commitment. If they haven't, haunt them, send them emails, make phone calls, get them to sign this commitment, because I feel this is what we really need. But then if they sign the commitment, what you'll find is your students want to go, because that's where it's all at. Students get it. They want to invent a safer world. Your students look up to you, and I'm just so happy that you're in the jobs that you're in, and the future just looks pretty bright because of it. Thank you.
Wow. Did he bring that home or what? That was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Assistant Secretary LePage. Thank you, Dr. Warner, for all you're doing.